While they were celebrating, the empire was already falling. Music filled the palace, wine overflowed, laughter echoed through golden halls. But outside, in the darkness, something had already begun. And before the night was over, Babylon would be no more. Babylon was not just a city. It was a symbol of power unlike anything the world had ever seen. Its walls rose high above the horizon, massive and impenetrable, so wide that entire chariots could ride across them side by side. These were not just defenses. They were a declaration, a message to every nation that looked upon it. This city cannot be taken. At its gate stood towering structures of bronze, heavy and unyielding, guarding the entrance to a world of wealth, influence, and control. And through the heart of the city flowed a river, bringing life, protection, and an illusion of perfect security. To those who lived within its walls, Babylon did not feel temporary. It did not feel vulnerable. It felt permanent, untouchable, unbreakable, eternal. There was no urgency, no sense of danger, no reason to fear what was beyond the walls, because in their minds, no army could breach it, no strategy could overcome it, and no force on earth could ever bring Babylon down. That night, while the city rested behind its massive walls, the king made a choice that would define everything that followed. Instead of preparing for what might come, he chose to celebrate. Inside the palace, King Belshazzar lifted his cup, surrounded by nobles, officials, and guests who had no reason to fear what was beyond the walls. Music filled the air, echoing through the vast halls as dancers moved between columns of stone and gold. Laughter grew louder with every passing moment, and wine flowed freely without measure, without restraint. It was a night of confidence, a night of excess, a night that felt completely untouchable. But in the middle of that celebration, something shifted. The king gave an order, not for more music, not for more wine, but for something that should never have been there. Sacred vessels, taken years before from the temple in Jerusalem. Objects once set apart for worship, now carried into a room filled with noise, pride, and disregard. Gold and silver cups, once used in reverence, now placed into the hands of men who saw them as nothing more than decoration. And without hesitation, they drank from them. They laughed as they raised them. They celebrated with them, as if what was sacred and had no meaning at all, as if there were no consequence, as if nothing could ever interrupt that night. And then, in the middle of the celebration, without warning, everything changed. Just moments before, the palace had been filled with music, laughter, and movement, but suddenly the entire atmosphere collapsed into a silence so heavy it felt unnatural. What began as a subtle flicker of light at the edge of the room quickly drew every eye toward the same place as something impossible started to take shape. It was not a shadow cast by the flames, nor a trick of the light playing against the walls, but a hand, real, visible, and suspended in the air, moving with purpose toward the stone surface of the palace. Without a sound, it began to write. The room stood still as the letters appeared one by one, slowly and deliberately, as if each stroke carried a meaning far beyond human understanding. Many, many. Tekel. Uphasin. The words seemed to burn into the wall itself, leaving behind a presence that could not be ignored and could not be explained. In an instant, the celebration that had filled the hall was gone, replaced by a growing sense of fear that spread through every person in the room. Faces turned pale, movement stopped, and even the sound of breathing felt out of place in the silence that followed. The king felt it more than anyone. The confidence that had defined him only moments before vanished completely, his strength giving way as the reality of what he was witnessing settled in, because deep within him, beyond pride and beyond reason, he understood something no one needed to say out loud. This was not random, this was not illusion, and this was not a message that could be ignored. No one in that room could understand what they were seeing. The letters were clear, yet their meaning remained hidden, beyond the reach of every wise man, every advisor, and every voice that had once claimed authority in the kingdom. One by one, they failed, and the silence that followed only deepened the fear already spreading through the palace, until one man was called: Daniel. He entered not with confusion, and not with fear, but with a calm that stood in stark contrast to the chaos around him. Where others hesitated, he understood. Where others questioned, he answered. And without delay, he spoke. The words were not rushed, and they were not uncertain, but carried a weight that seemed to settle over the entire room. He told the king that his kingdom had been measured, examined, and found lacking, that the power he believed to be unshakable had already reached its end, and that before that very night was over, everything he ruled would be taken from him. No one interrupted, no one argued, because deep down, every person in that room knew the same thing. This was not a warning for the future. It was a declaration of what was already happening. And beyond the walls of the palace, in the darkness where no one had been looking, the fall of Babylon had already begun. While the celebration continued inside the palace, untouched by fear and filled with the illusion of control, something far more decisive was unfolding beyond the walls of the city. In the darkness of the night, where no one was watching and no alarm had been raised, the enemy was already in motion. The Persians did not come with noise, and they did not rely on force in the way Babylon expected. They did not attempt to break the walls that had long been considered impenetrable, and they did not march against the gates that symbolized the city's strength. Instead, they chose a different path. They turned to the one element Babylon trusted the most, the river. Quietly and with precision, they diverted its flow, redirecting the water that once protected the city and gave it life. As the current weakened and the level began to fall, something hidden for generations slowly revealed itself beneath the surface. A path, a way in. What had once been a barrier became an entrance. And in the silence of that night, with no resistance and no warning, soldiers began to move through the exposed riverbed, advancing carefully toward the heart of Babylon. Step by step, they crossed into a city that still believed itself untouchable. Shadow by shadow, they moved forward, unseen and uninterrupted. There were no cries for help, no clash of armies, no moment of defense, because by the time Babylon could have reacted, it was already too late. The fall had not begun with an attack. It had begun in silence, and by that moment, Babylon was already lost. By the time they began to understand what was happening, it was already too late. What had entered the city in silence now spread with unstoppable force, turning certainty into confusion and confidence into fear. Inside the palace, the atmosphere shifted in an instant, as the celebration collapsed into chaos and the illusion of control shattered completely. Voices that had once been filled with laughter were now raised in panic, and the same halls that echoed with music just moments before were overtaken by urgency, fear, and disbelief. Beyond the palace walls, the city followed the same fate as confusion spread from street to street, and the reality of what was happening became impossible to ignore. There was no time to prepare, no chance to organize, and no opportunity to resist what had already taken hold. The unthinkable had become reality. Babylon, the city that believed itself untouchable, had fallen, not over months, not through a prolonged war, but in a single night, without warning, without resistance, without mercy. The greatest empire of its time did not fall in a long and brutal battle, nor was it brought down by overwhelming force. It fell in something far less visible, yet far more dangerous. It fell in arrogance. While the city celebrated its strength and its certainty, it ignored the warning that had been placed right before its eyes. While its people believed themselves to be secure, untouchable, and beyond the reach of any threat, the very foundation of that confidence was already collapsing. Because the fall of Babylon did not begin when the enemy entered the city. It began much earlier. It began in the moment they stopped questioning their own security, in the moment they dismissed the possibility of failure, in the moment they believed that what they had built could never be taken from them. And that is what makes this story more than just history, because sometimes the most decisive turning points are not marked by noise, conflict, or visible change, but by something far more subtle. A quiet shift, a warning ignored, a confidence that slowly turns into blindness. and by the time the fall becomes visible, it has already happened. Now I want to ask you, how many warnings do people ignore today? And how many times does the fall begin silently? If you want to explore more stories like this, subscribe to Ancient Bible Lands, because understanding the past changes the way we see everything.